Well, good morning, everybody. Here's my plan for today on the forecast video. I want to first start off talking about some recent rains, kind of get into where we think Hurricane Beryl and the remnants of Beryl are going to be going over the next 7 to 10 days. I want to walk you through some of the near-term model forecasts. We'll hit our normal 5 model update. Then I'm going to push this out a little bit longer, take a look at the temperature extremes we're expecting to see in the western United States. And then I'm going to talk about La Niña a bit at the end here. So we're going to get into some long-range discussion here, even a little bit about the hurricane season as well. And I'll finish up with a global update. So that's going to be the plan. We're going to look out there in the next 10 days as to some things that are pressuring crops around the rest of the world. So the map I've left you on here is just our last 7 days of total accumulated precipitation. And this is through midnight this morning. I just make these maps once a day early in the morning. And what you've got here is, again, just kind of a highlighted area where storms have rolled around the top of this ridge, been caught up in the flow that's just rolled through parts of southern Canada, and just really rained a lot. And this is, again, a situation where there is plenty of Gulf moisture, but there's also a lot of moisture just being recycled from how wet this spring has been. Another point to stress here, we watched drought develop across parts of the southeast to the mid-Atlantic, but in the last 7 days, there have been areas that have been able to get some much needed precipitation. With the ridge trying to plant itself at times down here in parts of Texas and Oklahoma, there have been pockets that have been exceptionally hot and dry inside of this, but storms have tried to run the periphery, get caught up in frontal boundaries that are stretched across the Midwest, which has meant we've linked together the southwest monsoon with frontal boundaries that sit on top of this ridge. But this is just how things have looked over the last 7 days. And yesterday we watched storms just kind of unzip along a frontal boundary here, producing some wind damage, some hail. We had a couple of tornado reports out of this as well. But you can kind of see that link I mentioned with the southwestern monsoonal flow here around the broader ridge to the south, while lows curl up into parts of Manitoba and Ontario. On the back side of this, though, had some great, chances to get some rain in parts of Montana and getting into the Dakotas as well. Just a few scattered showers and storms. And you can see that if I just show you the last 24 hours of total accumulated precip. We're just talking about some of this on the backside of this low. But again, very heavy rains came through parts of Iowa, southern Wisconsin, right here along the Mississippi River, and then kind of a bullseye yesterday in terms of the heaviest rain getting into parts of Missouri. Okay, as we think about some other factors here, I wanted to zoom in kind of in the southwestern United States, because I was looking at, I was just kind of looking here at what was going on the back side of this, where the heat is really building in. And we watched a couple of very large wildfires, one here in Utah and a couple in California, just show up with their smoke on satellite yesterday. And just an important thing that we have to keep watching. So I thought I'd run real quickly the high-resolution rapid refresh forecast of vertically integrated smoke, just so we can get a sense as to where the models are suggesting the smoke will go again today. So quite smoky throughout much of California. Of course, this is, I'm not trying to compare here, but this is not like what it could be in these very, very hot, dry, wildfire-prone years. We have a few isolated fires that are being attended to. I just wanted to show you what the smoke forecast looks like. But this just kind of highlights the vulnerability we have going into this late summer and then eventually autumn time period, where we do expect fire risk to be elevated in the west. From there, though, we just have to talk about where the remnants of Beryl will eventually make it. As you can see on satellite early this morning as the sun rises, Beryl has kind of lost some of its symmetry, and what looked really good on satellite yesterday is kind of filled in a bit today in terms of where the eye is located. It did ingest a bit of dry air on its western side, and there has been a bit of an increase in wind shear there as well. But still, this is a powerful hurricane, and currently, if you just take a look at the current status, we're at Category 4, and it is expected to move again in the next 48 hours toward the Yucatan Peninsula. There hasn't been, I wouldn't say there's been too much of a shift on landfall here. It'll be very important for us to watch throughout the rest of the day today as it goes south of Jamaica, what kind of damage we will have there. But again, the landfall here has been pretty consistent as to where it's going. What needs to be discussed is where does this end up after it goes through the Bay of Campeche? Is it going to hit Mexico and Texas, or is it going to maybe curl into the southern plains or get into the lower Mississippi River Valley? So I wanted to again show you the super blend, or the super ensemble of Beryl. So this includes the European, the GFS, the UK MET, and the CMC. And as we just play this out, what I'm trying to take note of here is what are the steering currents once we get out there to like July the 7th, as to take what's left of Beryl and pull it north. Because you can see some of the ensemble members are doing that. In fact, some of them are just taking the remnants of this and pulling it into the Ohio Valley. So I want to be very clear on something. You might see maps like this on Twitter and Facebook, whatever you consume in terms of social media. And it's just, what's important is you have to understand that while we're watching the track of the low, but this doesn't mean it's going to be hurricane strength in here. This is just where the low is going. So when I say remnants, this is really just a discussion about moisture. As by the time we get to the 7th, as this resets here, we can see just a couple of things at play. I mean, here's our Bermuda high. It's quite large. Southern side of it, the strong trades. We're going to have to watch another potential tropical event here. But this is Beryl, and the deeper trough that is in the upper Midwest and northern plains and, Canadian prairie, this is what's helping to pull this around. And so, to be honest, I hope it does. I'd like to just get Beryl's moisture in here. Let's use it to kind of break the heat that's in this area, the drought that's been developing in Texas and Oklahoma. It's been tucked inside that ridge. So, I'm not allowed to root for a storm system, but if we can get this thing to weaken and then make its way through here, that'd be really a good thing overall for agriculture. We see that some of the models are suggesting that. This is just the newest 14-day forecast from the European Ensemble on Precipitation Anomalies. And we talked yesterday about the amelioration of drought in parts of Mexico from what's left of Beryl, combined with what was just had with Alberto. But there is some clue that this is going to be bringing some of its moisture into this area, while a large ridge builds into the west. And we finally get some dryness going through parts of the Canadian prairie, which has been exceptionally wet. Now, we're going to talk about the upper Midwest more in a minute and about the precipitation chances here. But just take note, there is the possibility of bringing some flow into parts of the southeast, which this is another area we've been watching kind of long-standing drought develop over the last, 6 weeks in pockets, despite some better storms as of late. So I really like this map today. This seems to encapsulate a lot of what's going on. So let's do this by zooming in on the Northern Hemisphere. The last several videos, I've just focused on North America, but I want you to kind of see the whole picture here. Artificial intelligence forecast, we're just playing this through the 4th of July, so we're going to keep an eye on this trough, not only cooling things down in the Midwest, upper Midwest, but we'll see where the storms are going to be from this. We'll play forward into Friday and Saturday. That's when the extensive ridge begins to build, and the pattern gets it gets slowed down. And the reason it's getting slowed down is partly because of this ridge over this trough, the deep trough that's way off the coast, the highly amplified ridge that's on the west coast, and this deeper trough coming through the Midwest. So what you can see in this pattern is a whole lot of north-south movement in the flow rather than west to east. And that's what allows ridges to really amplify and troughs to dig and stay put for a while. And that's why we're going to be watching this western U.S. ridge and its influence on the heat wave going through there, lasting several days. So this is Sunday, getting into Monday and Tuesday, and we kind of see the same ideas here, right? Broader trough, big ridge in the west. This stays out here. A lot of north-south meridional flow versus flow that happens in the zonal direction, which would be west to east. Around the 11th and 12th, I did notice something in the AIFS that's also in the European Ensemble and other models. And around the 13th and 14th, we do see kind of a really far north retreat of the jet. It's somewhere here. It's going to be fast, as we talked about yesterday, coming into this area. But in terms of a height pattern, this is pretty far north, and the ridge tends to open here, coming out of the west and opening over kind of the Continental Divide or the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains. And we're out there pretty far. This is mid-July. This is the 15th and the 16th, and we see that. But as we talked about yesterday, have we really lost the main characteristics of this flow, which has been very fast winds in this area in the upper levels of the jet stream? And as you look out here this far, this is mid-July, where's the ridge? Like, is there some big ridge anchoring, or is it just kind of meandering with higher heights to the south and better flow way to the north? That seems to be where this pattern's going. At the end of this, I want to talk about ridging here and ridging way over here as well, and what it could do for the pattern rolling across North America. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. But first, I want to get into this morning's all hazards weather map. I am getting ready to record here, or not record, but upload this at the Walmart parking lot, which is my only spot I can get good internet, way up here in the North Woods. And so it's early, and people are already looking at me here, wondering what the heck I'm doing. But this is the this is our current all hazards map, and we've got excessive heat watches, warnings, advisories rolling up the West Coast. It's going to be very hot. I think we might see a couple of days where the temperatures touch 120 plus in the Central Valley of California, and then, of course, much higher down here in the desert. But notice how we've now extended this up to the Columbia Basin. We also have a broad area here of heat advisories with, the central area here where the greatest risk of the excessive heat will be. That's an excessive heat warning. But to the north of it, major cool down has already happened. And what's problematic is early this morning, these temperatures never really got cool overnight. We barely got down out of the 80s for a big section of the south. And, early this morning before the sun rose in Phoenix, it dropped to 93 degrees Fahrenheit. So very, very hot in the southwest as well. Just taking a look as this resets here at the moisture in the atmosphere. We can see where the front currently sits, right? It's gone right through the upper Midwest, the western Corn Belt, the northern plains. Drier air in place here. That's what's shaded. But the much more humid air to the south of this is just living in this area, making it quite unbearable. So it's a very dry heat in the west, as you all are very well aware of, and a very hot and humid heat in this area. So multiple ways to get those heat advisories, watches, and warnings. In terms of severe weather, it's going to be along the frontal boundary, right through there today. We're going to keep an eye on the Ohio River Valley, back in the western plains here for the risk of severe storms. This will be tomorrow on the 4th of July, so we've kind of honed in all week on parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and a big section of Missouri for the risk of severe weather. As we get into July the 5th, which will be Friday, we're going to keep an eye on this side of the Ohio Valley, but a broad area of thunderstorms is possible on the 5th of July. This morning, we've got storms that are kind of stretched right here from parts of kind of the high plains of Colorado straight through Kansas, stretching into Missouri, almost getting to about St. Louis. Got some active storms. And I was just watching on radar this morning. Let's blow that up. We can see that that's kind of where our main rainfall event is early this morning. Right in through here, connected to this low, with on the backside some good rains kind of moving through some critical areas here that I've been worried about for a while for being dry. In fact, Beryl is outdoing my forecast. Remember, I've been telling you, I'm really worried about this area. This frontal boundary plus Beryl coming through could really help this area avoid the drought scenario that I was so concerned about for midsummer. So we'll talk more about that in a second. Okay, knowing that that's what the radar looked like, this is 8 a.m., I think that was a pretty good initialization on the model. At least it's got the main features here. So as we play through the middle of the day today, getting into this evening, remember, right in through here, and then this region is going to be on the lookout for the strongest severe storms tonight. Scattered storms like you saw yesterday on the backside of the low here. And you can see some monsoonal flow trying to come up into this region as well. Into the overnight hours, and now we're getting into the 4th of July. There's a trough. Remember, we saw this as the big ridge builds into the west. Here's the trough sneaking through. So we're at 10 a.m. on the 4th of July, playing through the middle of the day toward the evening. So there's our low. This is going to be a lot of rainfall in these thunderstorms, capable of putting down some pretty heavy rainfall here. But we're going to watch the southern side of it right in through there for, I think, the greatest risk of the severe storms as we work our way toward when a lot of folks will be watching fireworks. So we'll keep an eye on this low right there tomorrow night on the 4th of July. Playing forward into the early morning hours on the 5th, that low curls up right over Illinois and Indiana, the northern edge of which has the heavier rain. So a soaker here on the 5th of July. All right, from that point forward, the context behind all this rain again comes down to this kind of brown ocean idea, right? So we're recycling a lot of water that's in place here. And you can see in the soil moisture just how saturated things are. To the south of that, this is an area that needs to get the moisture back in place. Now, we've had storms. We've seen rain get into these pockets, not necessarily here in this part of Oklahoma, but around it and into the Ohio Valley. But we need more moisture in this area as we move through this critical month of July for crops in these areas. Some better storms here have helped push back the drought that's been developing, but it's not been widespread and ubiquitous. Take a look at these parts of Virginia, into parts of North Carolina, and right here on the border of North and South Carolina. And in the west, with all of this heat, again, the dryness, where there's not moisture in the lower atmosphere or in the plants to really evaporate and increase the moisture content. So just kind of taking a look at these components of the flow. And again, look at the southwest monsoon's early start here, really hitting this region. Okay, let's walk through our 5 models. I hope you like this. I really enjoy seeing all 5 of them stacked up against one another. This is the artificial intelligence forecast for the next 7 days. I'm starting to hone in on kind of 3 different things. AI, so we're going to have to watch AI carefully into this hurricane season. This is where it's got the moisture from Beryl through the next 7 days, which is July the 9th. We then see this is the NBM. So again, the moisture from Beryl, the frontal boundaries here and here. And we get into the WPC, 1, 2, 3. Got these 3 different pockets of heavier rainfall. This would now be the European model. I see it as well. 1, kind of 2. But what's interesting is the operational European strands Beryl way down here into Mexico. And comparing that to the GFS, which pulls it right into southeast Texas, that's a completely different forecast. In fact, if you compare the two, take a look at the track differences here. Remember, on this map, these colors represent where the European is wetter. This is where the GFS is wetter, and by how much. So pretty clear distinction on where the GFS operational is taking what's left of Beryl and where the European is taking it as well, farther to the south. So we'll have to watch this carefully as we finish up this week. From there, I want to compare models. You'll see what I just mentioned here in a few moments. But let's pick this up early this morning about 7 a.m. and play it through. We've already got a good idea on that lingering front there tonight. It's in both models pretty well. Beryl moving by the time we get into early Friday morning toward the Yucatan Peninsula. GFS is more north than where the European is, which is here. So you can see the difference where they're going to make landfall in the models. But remember, on Friday, this low curls up right over this part of the Midwest. And that's what's going to be bringing in some cooler weather and some wetter weather while the big heat wave continues in the western United States. That low moves toward the northeast as we get into Saturday. I'll be watching to see if the frontal boundary here can deliver some rain. And as we go through Saturday into Sunday, we can watch where Beryl comes through while the broader trough lives in the Midwest. So there's more chances of rainfall here. And along the Gulf Coast, there's Beryl. And as we go forward, the European model strands it in Mexico. The GFS pulls it into Texas. But out ahead of it seems to be plenty of moisture for storms in this area on Monday, July the 8th. As we go forward to next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in the models, I'm seeing Beryl's moisture getting pulled farther and farther to the north, but we're kind of losing our ability to use an operational model to predict, I think, where things are going to go. So I just want to compare ensembles here. This is the 10-day outlook from the European ensemble on total precipitation, greater than an inch, and this is the GFS. So let's just walk back and forth. 10-day probability of more than an inch from the GFS and from the European. While they may be pretty darn close on these events, it's where Beryl goes that I think will be most critical. But the reality is we're either recycling moisture or we've kept the Gulf open, and there's good chances of storms in this area for a while. So that takes me to kind of the week 2 pattern. Now remember, in week 2, we saw the jet retreat pretty far to the north. Okay? And so what I'm seeing here at that time period is we've got this surge of moisture, again, what's left of Beryl. And then the jet stream is going to be way up here, kind of doing something like this. And we've got flow coming around here like this. So this is a bit of a drier look in this area than it's been. And probably some of you are clapping right now if you live in this region. I said drier, not dry, just to be clear on that. But it's pretty consistent with all the models. Again, the GFS, I know I say this a lot, but just take note of the dry bias it's always got down here in the southeast. I got to do more investigation into that at some point, but much different from the other 2 forecast models into week 2. Now, why this is so important, these rains that could potentially get into the southeast, is remember that over the last month, we saw a 2-class degradation and drought in this area. And there have been storms lately in this region, but a 2-class degradation here, while we've seen a 2-class improvement in parts of Kansas, getting back to the panhandles and even into New Mexico, All right, from there, we got to walk into these temperatures. And the focus is going to be on the heat in the south and then the exceptional heat that's in the west. Today's highs easily above 110 degrees throughout much of the Central Valley of California. Tomorrow, same thing, but watch the heat creep up the west coast. By the time we get into Friday, we're going to have temperatures approaching 30 degrees warmer than normal throughout the Willamette Valley, just as an example. But with that deep trough that's coming through the midsection of the country, cool down for this point in July. Major cool down here. But the heat just lines the periphery of this. And it's going to be very hot. We're now at Saturday into Sunday. No break in the heat in the west. This is Monday into Tuesday. It just continues in the western United States to be hotter and hotter. So that seems to be the pattern all the way day 5 through 10 and day 10 through 15. And that's also in the European as well. So that ridge that's in the west, that meridional flow, that north-south flow, just seems to be dominating the pattern as we go forward toward the middle of this month. So taking all of that and trying to do something different with it, I want to first talk about the tropics, talk a little bit about La Niña's development, and then think about what it could mean going forward if La Niña does start to take over. You know, I like to show you these Hofmuller diagrams. So this is today, and this goes all the way through the 17th of July. And you're looking over this geography, and these colors represent where air is going up and down. So you notice we have a lot of ascent in this area. So again, if you just line it up, it's all within, in this area. But the MJO isn't really sitting in one particular spot strongly, but we just kind of see this wave moving in this direction. And there's some suppression here. And why we watch this is because as we approach kind of the rest of July and August, this is talk about hurricanes. And so we're trying to figure out where there's going to be a lid on the atmosphere and where we're going to let the atmosphere go. So to see this type of diagram from the top down, you can look at it this way. And I'm going to show you the GFS for this one. So what you always need to do with this is just remember that these greens represent where there's air rising. That's negative velocity potentials. And the reds represent where there's like a cap on it. And it's interesting just to know that where Beryl snuck through was just close to an area that had some suppression. And as we play this forward, just thinking about where things might be going as we get into, a bit later into, farther into July, I just have to think that there might continue to be some suppression of some early tropical activity, maybe. Remember, there's some dust. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is if this verifies, I don't necessarily think we're just going to see storm system after storm system after storm system right away. We might have a bit more time between those tropical events here in the Atlantic, just given the upper level atmosphere. Now, that's just one component, so let me be clear on that. But we do see a lot of rising motion way out here, and this is kind of an indicator that maybe at times La Niña is trying to do its thing and get going. Because if you say, Eric, what's La Niña mean? It means a lot of rising motion here. But normally I'm talking about fall or winter. And so we just need to step back and assess if La Niña is really doing much. Well, the first thing is, again, from the 3rd to the 17th, these blues represent where we have stronger easterly winds. So where you see them, this is stronger easterly winds. And we got to see a lot of blues for there to be La Niña. That's the general idea behind this. So just thinking about it, has it done much to the ocean temperatures? Well, Niño region 3.4, all right, that is the spot right in the middle along the equator, right in the middle of the Pacific. That tends to be what our most common measurement point is for an El Niño or La Niña. And La Niña, we got to get way down here. And it's just been bumbling around average ever since El Niño crashed way back in February. But if you get over closer to the coast of South America, we've got ocean temperatures that have really dropped. And where I'm talking about is right in through here. Now, I want to show you two different sea surface temperature anomaly maps. The first one here is being compared to average climatology, the average from 1981 to 2010. This comes from Tropical Tidbits. And so this would be where we're starting to get those trade winds, allowing for more upwelling. But Niña region 3.4 is over here, roughly. And that's why you see near average ocean temperatures, it's a little cooler on this side, a little warmer on that. That's why we see that Niño 3.4. So really we would say this is more of a kind of an east-based start to La Niña, which is normal. That's what it is. But what I'd like to do is really talk more about the dominant factors in this pattern, which are here and here. And where we've seen high pressure, I've talked about this several weeks now, high pressure forming on these warmer waters and how the jet has lived north of it, come across the United States, and then sent up like this. These two areas of very warm water are helping the atmosphere produce high pressure and send the jet stream farther and farther to the north, which is what kind of a concept we've had a lot for this summer. keeping it along the U.S.-Canada border at times. Okay, another way to look at this, I told you 2 maps. Here's the other way. This is a map where we're not comparing this to history. We're comparing it to the global average right now. So today's global average, so add it all up, divide it by the total number of pixels, and then get your average temperature. We then notice how dominant these 2 features are and how cool we've been able to get this relative to the global average here. So there have been some decent trades, you can even see them here, that have started to show up, okay? Excuse me, that's actually not right there. Right down into here, that started to pull this out a little bit. But if it's June and I'm like, where is this? If we had full-blown La Nina, you'd see arrows going like this, and the shading would be way up here, and I would just be talking nonstop about how this is going to steal the momentum from the jet stream flow, which is there. But what's happened is we've not done that. There's been a little bit right there of some surging trade winds in the month of June. To the north of it, the flow's going in this direction. Well, what it's done is it's got the flow coming around like this and like that. So the jets lived over the top of this, as I just drew for you. So we just want to know, like, what does all this mean and where is it possibly going? And if La Nina is going to be a more dominant factor in late summer into early autumn, what do we get? So I went out and created a map that shows you the correlation with something called the multivariate ENSO index, MEI. And we're going to look at August to October. Now we have to understand what's going on here when I make this. This is a correlation with an index, where if the index is positive, you have an El Nino. If it's negative, it's a La Nina. So when I make the correlation right now, this is what would happen if there was an El Nino. We'd have the jet stream living down here, coming across the country, splitting going into Alaska and diving into this area, something like that. Which means wherever you see the green colors and the blue colors, these negative correlations, it would be troughs and cooler. All right. So why we need to think about this is we don't have that. I'm watching for this to be a ridge of high pressure because we're going into La Nina, and this to be a ridge of high pressure because we're going into La Nina, and therefore this to be a ridge of high pressure because we're going into La Nina as we go into August, September, and October. And that what will result in this kind of triple ridge pattern is what we think will be the August setup. And so just thinking about that, August, September, October, I want to give you a couple of maps. I need to blow this up so you can see it. This is the first one. This is a correlation between the multivariate ENSO index and precipitation. So when you see warm colors, that would mean that in an El Nino year, it would be wetter. But we are in a La Nina year, right? We're going toward La Nina during this time frame. So we have to think about this being some later season dryness in this area. That's what if La Nina becomes a dominant factor, we would get. All right, so keep that straight in your head. So this would mean we would drier here and possibly be wetter up the coast. Now, you're only needing to look at the higher correlation coefficients. That's where there's actually something to be said. But drier autumn possible, that would be what this would suggest, where you see these warmer colors. The temperature is a little bit easier, I think, to pick up on. So if we look at August to October, multivariate ENSO index, and we look at the temperatures, let's let this load here. Hopefully, there we go. We would see that this region, which is showing up in blue, which has a negative correlation, just be clear, this would be where things will be warmer. Okay? I've been worried because of how wet things were, especially here, about getting any sort of a risk of early frost. If we can get La Nina in place, we tend to be warmer into fall in this area, August, September, and October. And I just want to watch that. That's just one piece of this whole puzzle. But coming back to that idea on the pressure pattern, through mid-August, seeing higher pressure here than normal and higher pressure there than normal really just blends down into this idea of what's going to happen in the midsection of the U.S. And that I'm going to continue to work on that story as we progress forward through the rest of July, because it seems to be, to me, that we would anchor higher pressure and weaker flow at some point in late July into August into this area. and how storms go over the top of this, all the different pieces. And then, of course, what does the hurricane season do to upset it? Because right now, the Hurricane Beryl and its potential for bringing in rain into parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, I mean, that's huge to get that moisture into that spot from a hurricane that came out of the Caribbean and eventually the Gulf. And it can do that again and again and keep outdoing any sort of longer-term risk that we may find from something else. That's the big idea here. So just keep it all in the back of your mind as we go forward and keep this story going. What I want to do next, though, is give you a bit of information on kind of some international weather. And what's interesting is, do you see this down here? Look at these deeper troughs of low pressure just rolling with much stronger flow south of Australia. This is what's making this winter time frame wetter. Parts of Western Australia desperately needed rain. South Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, we need to get this moisture into place. Other areas, the Indian monsoon still going, rain in the Ganges River Valley. That was a dry spot back in May and most of June. We flipped the precipitation pattern in China. The Meiyu front has now gone north of the Yangtze River. We see much drier conditions to the south where there have been flooding, and rain is hitting the drought-stricken areas here. In fact, there's a lot of rain. On the northern side of this part of the Manchurian Plain and the North China Plain, just kind of taking a look in here, these are areas that we grow a lot of crop that are getting a bit of a drier signal as all the rain stays focused on the Meiyu front. If you come over to this part of Europe, again, we see this dry signal in the models from eastern Ukraine. And remember, earlier this week, we looked at the NDVI analysis for this area, and it is low. But for me, just thinking about the U.S., I'll be watching whatever comes off of Africa and eventually gets into the warm waters of the Atlantic and becomes our stronger tropical signal going forward. That, and where does the jet stream live? Does it just keep staying far to the north as we project or not? So that's it. And I guess I should say one more thing. It's the dry season in South America. Much of Brazil, like the Cerrado. But take a look at this frontal boundary in through here, dumping some rain in like Mato Grosso do Sul over toward parts of Paraná, but Sao Paulo. That's important to look at. Lastly, this is our temperature pattern over the next 10 days. And cooler throughout India's Ganges River Valley. But take a look at the heat here. And the heat there. So that's what I'm watching. I'll pick this up again on Friday. Hope you all have a great 4th of July. We'll talk soon. Thanks.